Welcome, everyone. So excited that you're here. Really, really happy to be here and have our awesome group of speakers. I'll introduce them in just a moment. But first, um, gotta make sure that we are streaming for our friends on YouTube, and it looks like we are. Okay, so assuming that everyone can see the screen, yes?
Yes.
Awesome. Um, yes, it
The
is.
meeting is being recorded.
It
So
is
hit,
being recorded. We archive
yeah, so
everything.
hit continue here. There we go.
Yes, please hit continue and then you'll be able to see the rest of the screen. So thanks everyone for joining us for tonight's virtual program, Building Dialogue, the Cayton-Revels House. My name is Taylor and I'm the Community Events Manager at Historic Seattle. Tonight I am live from my home office, although my Zoom background would suggest otherwise. It's a black and white image of the Cayton-Revels House. I think it was taken in 19... It's on the full-size image. I'll get back to that.
1909, 1909.
There we go. Thank you. I was like, I should have looked. And the house is in Seattle, Washington, of course. So our mission at Historic Seattle is saving meaningful places to foster lively communities. And I want to give a special shout out to all of my Historic Seattle colleagues who are here. I can't see you all, but you can just wave so that everyone knows who you are. Appreciate you all. Alrighty, moving right along. So at Historic Seattle, we know that our properties and our programs occupy the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples. And the acknowledgement is not a substitute for developing relationships with Indigenous communities or for honoring Indigenous stories as we share our collective history, like tonight's program. But it's a first step in recognizing the people whose land we occupy. So I have a few thank yous before we get into the goods of tonight's program. I want to thank our sponsors for making our education programming possible. Thank you, Bricklayers and Allied Craft Workers, Local 1 Washington and Alaska. These are on the top three under underwriting partners. Daniels Real Estate, the Greystone, and the Lodge at St. Edward Park, and Sellen Construction. All right, so I'm, like I said, so excited for tonight's discussion, and we've tweaked the format of Building Dialogue just a bit for tonight's program, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you all later, but also really learning from tonight's Building Dialogue. So we'll kick off the program with a presentation from Taha Ibrahimi. Taha authored the landmark nomination, and she'll spend about 15 minutes sharing some insights and learnings with us about the landmarking process. And the title of the presentation is Community-Led Landmarking, Demystifying the Process. I am so ready for this, Taha. And I think we all are looking forward to learning about your journey and what landmarking is all about. Some of us know, some of us really don't. So this is perfect. And then after Taha's presentation, we'll open the floor up for a group-wide discussion about the house with our special guest that I'll introduce in just a moment. And during that discussion time, I just want to remind everyone that this is a respectful place for listening, learning, and exploration. And as soon as I'm done talking at you all, I will share the discussion guideline in the chat so you can view those. And then when we get started with our chat in about 15-ish minutes, we'll review those together. So without further ado, I want to introduce our all-stars for tonight. This is our awesome lineup of speakers. We've got Kathy Jo Ackerman, current owner of the Cayton-Revels House, Taha Ibrahimi, who authored the landmark nomination, and we'll hear from Taha in just a moment. Erie Jones, also current owner of the Cayton-Revels House, and Harold Woodson, who's a member of the Cayton-Revels family. So, wonderful group of folks. Can't wait to be in discussion with the four of them and all of you. So I'll stop my share now so that we can turn it over to Taha.
Great. Can you see that right now?
Yes, and it looks great.
Yeah. Perfect. Great. This photo is actually of the Cayton-Revels house. Just this past winter when we had that crazy snowstorm. It is located at 518 14th Avenue East, just a couple of blocks south of Volunteer Park between Mercer and Republican Streets. And here's the house in 1909. Of course, it's my background right now too. This is 110 years ago. And here is a photo of Horace Cayton and his wife, Susie Sumner Revels Cayton, taken around 1896 when they got married. And they lived in this house from 1902 to 1909. when this photo of the house was taken actually for an advertisement when they were about to rent the house out. Horace Cayton was born enslaved in Mississippi, and after being freed, he moved to Seattle, where he started the city's second most read newspaper, the Seattle Republican, which ran from 1894 to 1913. And at its peak, the Seattle Republican had an estimated 10,000 mostly white readers across Washington. His wife, Susie Sumner Revels Cayton, she was the daughter of Horace's college mentor, the first Black American US Senator, Hiram Rhodes Revels. And she moved up from Mississippi to Seattle and eventually became the associate editor of her husband's newspaper in 1900. And she's probably the first female editor in Seattle. The next time a female would be documented as being an editor of one of the most read newspapers in Seattle wouldn't be until 1940. And because of the Cayton's business and political involvements, they were one of the most well-known Black American families in Seattle at the turn of the century. Here's a family posing actually on the front porch of the house, which remarkably doesn't look much different today. You see Emma, Susie's niece, on the left, standing with the glasses. Susie is seated with Horace Jr. on her lap. And you see Horace Sr. with glasses standing above his second eldest daughter, Madge, who is seated. And then the eldest daughter, Ruth, is in front, blurred out a little bit. The success of the Seattle Republican allowed the Caytons to move up to the newly established affluent suburb of Capitol Hill. It was a suburb back then, where they were one of just a few Black American families who were living there in that period. And that first decade of the 1900s also happened to be a time when the Black American population in Seattle really surged as more people fled the South. And in 1900, there were only about 406 Black Americans in Seattle. But by the time the Caytons moved out of their home, that number had multiplied to over 2,000. So here's a picture of the Cayton house in 2020. And the house really hasn't changed much. As I mentioned, that photo, that group photo, was taken right there on the porch that you see in front of that window. The glass hasn't changed. And since then, the house has really only ever had a few owners. Today, the interior of the house is preserved pretty much as if in a time capsule. It's really amazing. As you can see from these photos, all the original features are intact. Everything you see here, from the fireplace, the mirror above the fireplace, the tiles, the hanging lamp even that you see, all of it is original. Nothing has even been painted over. It's really a testament to the stewardship of Erie and Kathy. So now fast forward 100 plus years. I recently moved back to Seattle 3 years ago, and I happen to live on Capitol Hill. A friend gave me this book as a Christmas present, I believe, The Hill with the Future, and it's about Capitol Hill and its history. And in it, it mentions the Cayton family and the address of the home. And I thought, I live just a couple of blocks away, let me walk by. I didn't really think that it would still be standing. So I walked by and it was still standing. And I can't really explain the feeling to you, but it felt like being transported in time. And from there, I was sort of hooked. So I looked it up, and I was fairly shocked to find out that the house wasn't landmarked. I personally was born and raised in Seattle, and I started wondering why I had never even heard about the Caytons before. I felt like maybe I was going crazy. So I went back to all my old history books that I had. And one of my favorite books about Seattle history is called Skid Row. And it has a whole chapter in it that's dedicated to the different newspapers that were published in Seattle. And there was no mention of the Seattle Republican. I was learning about the Caytons during the height of the quarantine and the George Floyd protests. So I had a lot of extra time to reflect on this. My own family was one of the first non-white families to move into the Windermere neighborhood of Seattle. And because we weren't white, my dad remembers the real estate agent pointing out the racial restrictive covenants in the property deed and explaining that it was fine for us to live there because the covenants weren't enforceable anymore, even if they were in the deed. So I didn't think my family ever really felt like we belonged in that neighborhood. And I really identified with the experience of feeling out of place in a neighborhood. I started reading more about the Caytons, and we have the research of these historians really to thank for keeping that Cayton story alive. There's The Cayton Legacy by Richard S. Hobbs, the legendary Esther Hall Mumford's Seattle Black Victorians, and Quintard Taylor's The Forging of a Black Community. They're all absolutely remarkable, and you should read them. They really inspired me. So I started telling everyone about the Cayton family story and taking them out on walks by the house. I never expected to run into the owners because it was a rental house. And I actually pulled this screenshot. Erie and Kathy don't know this, but from Erie's Instagram account. This was actually the day when an original pipe had broken coincidentally on a certain day. And Kathy, one of the owners, was on site with a work crew to make repairs, and I happened to be walking by. And I love this post because you can also see that Harold liked the post since they're friends in real life. So when I was outside that day, I said hi to Kathy and I asked her if she knew about the house's history, and she said she did. And as I remember it, I think I might have just offered to write the proposal there, even though I wasn't sure if I knew how to do that. So we exchanged email addresses, and that's how it all started. It was October of 2020. I give you that whole story just to let you know that I really had little experience in this, and I hope this inspires others who are watching this. Should you find a house or do some research that and you think that you found a possible landmark, you can do this also. So I want to go over the criteria just to kind of demystify the process for everybody. There are 6 criteria, and a landmark must meet at least one of these 6 criteria. And the Cayton-Revels house met 4 out of these 6 requirements. And I'm going to go over each one of those 4 just to give you an example of how it met those criteria. So I'm going to skip around a little bit, but starting with criteria B, the property must be associated with a person important to the history of the city, state, or nation. And as I mentioned, the Caytons published one of the most read newspapers in the city from 1894 to 1913. Susie Sumner Revels Cayton, Horace Cayton's wife, was also the daughter of Hiram Revels, the first Black U.S. senator. And he was a senator in 1870 in Mississippi. And she's likely, that is, Susie herself is likely Seattle's first female associate editor. And finally, both Horace and Susie Cayton made significant contributions to the development of early Seattle, from politics to the founding of the NAACP. So this house definitely meets this criteria. Criteria C, associated with an aspect of the cultural, political, or economic heritage of the community, city, state, or nation. And as I outlined in the previous criterion, the Caytons were associated with several aspects of Seattle's cultural, political, and economic heritage. As it was the specific period when the Caytons actually lived on Capitol Hill in the earliest 20th century, Seattle kind of saw a significant growth in Black American population, which was sparking an increase in racial discrimination and disenfranchisement. So their development during this time was also very critical. So skipping back to criteria A, we also put the Cayton-Revels house up to be nominated for this criteria, which is about a historic event. And this is really a little tricky to find a specific event, but we decided that the single specific event that the house could be associated with is that it's likely one of the first documented instances of racial residential discrimination against Black Americans in Seattle. So in April 1909, Seattle real estate broker Daniel Jones sued the Caytons, claiming that their skin color was lowering home values. And Jones actually went on to file many more lawsuits, becoming somewhat of a figure in Seattle's history. Jones developed much of Seattle, including Squire Park, also known as Cherry Hill, and he also developed Mount Baker, and he went on to famously try to stop other Black Americans from moving to some of his developments. And just as an aside, Jones actually lost all of his cases. But as a primary sales agent for at least 15 different additions to Seattle, he kind of dictated home ownership for Seattle's Black families for decades. And as another aside, Jones himself always lived out of a hotel. Capitol Hill officially began incorporating racial restrictive covenants in property deeds in the 1920s. They became unenforceable in 1948, and Congress didn't pass a Housing Rights Act until 1968. So this is a first documented instance of an important part of Seattle's history. And while there are many anecdotes about the Cayton-Revels House lawsuit, about racial restrictions, the Cayton-Revels House lawsuit is a tangible and specific event and first stage of racial residential discrimination in Seattle in the early 20th century. And furthermore, the physical house still exists. Moving on to criteria D about embodying characteristics of an architectural style or period or a method of construction. The Cayton-Revels House actually embodies distinctive visible characteristics of a plan or pattern book Queen Anne home, erected on speculation by builders, which constitutes a large part of the city's housing stock. And here you see an image of the Cayton-Revels House in the middle and an image of a popular Queen Anne pattern on the left. And incidentally, on the right, another image of a typical Queen Anne house, which happens to be the Martin Luther King Jr. childhood home. Pattern books were widely published in the early 1900s and were especially useful in the Puget Sound region before there were many architects up here. So only the elite could really offer to hire an architect, and many of the architect designed homes north of the Cayton-Revels House are actually by East Coast firms. And just as Black heritage has historically been overlooked in architectural preservation here and nationwide, homes made by builders and not architects, and homes without the pedigree of high architecture, homes for common people instead of the wealthy elite, all of these are often sometimes overlooked in preservation. And we believe that the Cayton-Revels House embodied the distinctive visible characteristics of a plan or pattern book Queen Anne home that common middle-class families in Seattle could afford in the Victorian era. So now I want to show you how an example of these criteria can be applied to another situation. So I happen to know that the Black Panther Party Seattle headquarters in Madrona isn't landmarked yet. And so we thought this would be a good example to use. So the Black Panther Party was founded in West Oakland, California in 1966. And the Seattle chapter was founded just 2 years later. It was not only the first chapter established outside California, but it was the longest living. So out of these 6 criteria that we went over with the Cayton-Revels House, we just want to help demystify by applying that same formula here. And I just wanted to show you that the Black Panther property likely meets at least 2 of these criteria. So out of the 6 landmarking criteria, the headquarters meets criteria B. It's associated with the life of an important person. Aaron Dixon was appointed as the captain of the Seattle chapter when he was 19 years old, and he counts as an important person in history. And for criteria C, associated with an aspect of the cultural, political, or economic heritage of the city, the Black Panthers were definitely key figures in Seattle's civil rights history. So they're responsible for the Carolyn Downs Family Medical Center on East Yesler Way, which is started as a free baby wellness clinic for low-income communities in 1969. I haven't done enough research to know if the property also meets criteria A, the location of a historic event, but I understand that there may have been a specific police raid that forced the party to change locations. So if someone can pinpoint that exact event, then this property would also meet criteria A. But hopefully this helps you understand the criteria a little bit better. So going into the proposal itself. So Once you've kind of verified to yourself that you think the property that you're looking at meets one of those criteria, at least, you got to fill out this very intimidating landmark application. So it's not as intimidating as it looks. You just need to know where to go. And I wanted to share that information with you. And this deck will be shared afterwards too, I believe. So don't worry, that URL will be there. But essentially, for the assessor's file number, the year built, and the legal description, all you need to do is go to the King County Parcel Viewer, and you can get all that information in one stop. So the outline, after the application is done, you need to put together the nomination proposal itself. I looked at a bunch of different proposals to kind of base mine on. They're all posted online on the Landmarks website. Here I've included the outline for the Cayton-Revels House, and I think it can be used as a template or formula for other nominations as well. There are 5 parts. The first section in the Cayton-Revels House proposal was about historic significance, and the second section is about the context of Seattle, sorry, the subsection under that, the first section is the Cayton-Revels House proposal. The second one is about the property, and the third one is about the neighborhood. And just looking under historic significance, you'll see that I have a subsection about the Seattle Republican, and I have a subsection about the greater context of Seattle's Black American heritage. And then I have some sections specifically on Horace and Susie Cayton, and then the Cayton children. And this can be translated, if you want to use the Black Panther Party Seattle headquarters again as an example. You could have a section on the historic significance. So you'd have a subsection on Black Panther Party Seattle chapter, a subsection on the context, which would have been Seattle's Black American civil rights history. And then you'd have a couple of subsections on specific characters. So Aaron Dixon and Elmer Dixon would count, and then notable Seattle Black Panther Party members. So that's the first part of your outline right there. For the property, all the exact same sections would count. And for the neighborhood, you would want to look up what plat it's in. And we know previously from the parcel viewer that it's the Randall's edition. So you'd have a subsection on the Randall's edition where it says plat history there. You'd have something on the neighborhood, which is Madrona, and then the nearby landmarks. And there you have an outline actually for a property. So I also wanted to list the resources. My animation is off there, but I wanted to list the resources I use for each of these sections. Many newspaper archives are online. I suggest doing just a keyword search on these 4 resources: the Washington Digital Newspapers, the Library of Congress lists a bunch of newspapers on there. History Link is awesome. And if you happen to have a subscription to the Seattle Times, you get free access to their archives. Aside from the books that I read, these are the sources that I used for this section. The property section can be very, very intimidating. However, I was very lucky to have the help of the community. A architect in Capitol Hill, after reaching out to him, he kindly offered to help me out. His name is Marvin, and I think actually Marvin is online, possibly. Marvin Anderson. Anyway, he was wonderful. All I had was this book, A Field Guide to American Houses. And that's how I wrote it. But with Marvin's help, he actually did research on the builder. And he also confirmed for me that whatever I was writing wasn't gobbledygook. So that was wonderful. And I just wanted to share all these early kind of tidbits, because sharing it with lots of people and reaching out to organizations that I thought might want to be involved or know about it, that was really the key to this and the biggest recommendation I would have. The support I got was amazing. As I said, local architect Marvin Anderson volunteered to look at my property section and edit it, and everyone wanted to help, no matter who I reached out to. The author of The Cayton Legacy, Richard Hobbs, was wonderful. And you'll be surprised how many resources are out there in the community. So don't forget to reach out to the community is my biggest piece of advice. Of course, King County also posts many great resources. So I'm including the URL to their page as well. So from start to finish, here's a timeline of the entire landmarking process. All told, it took about 3 to 4 months from the initial meeting on the lawn that day in October to when the proposal was submitted, which happened to be the week of our presidential inauguration and MLK Day in mid-January. The City Landmark Board considered the nomination at a meeting on February 17th, and they voted unanimously in favor. And we were invited to come back to another meeting in early April for the board to vote on which parts of the house would be designated. And in the case of the Cayton-Revels House, the exterior facade and most of the first floor were designated for preservation. And just this past month, the owners worked with the city to outline the specific controls. So from start to finish, the whole process probably took around 7 months. And this was kind of like hobby time, not full time. Before I end, I wanted to mention one other thing. And I don't believe this house would have gotten landmarked had it not been for the forethought of the Caytons' granddaughter, who they raised as their own daughter, Susan Cayton Woodson. And she is pictured here next to the mantle clock that the president of the Confederacy gave to her great grandfather, Hiram Rhodes Revels, as a gift for stepping up to take his spot on the US Senate. Susan was the family's archivist, and before she passed, she made it a point to meet and befriend Erie and Kathy, the owners of the Cayton-Revels House. And Susan was thinking light years ahead. By the time I entered the picture, very late in it, Erie and Kathy already knew about the house's history, and they were super excited about landmarking the house. And they had been remarkable stewards, keeping the house in amazing shape. Susan's son, Harold Woodson Jr., who we have the greatest honor to have with us on this call today, returned to scatter his mother's ashes at the property, and he is also friends with Erie and Kathy. I mention this all because approaching an owner can be very intimidating, and I understand that not having an agreeable owner can sometimes be one of the biggest barriers to getting something landmarked. And this might be because some owners have misperceptions about what it means to have a property landmarked, or they just may not understand the incentives. So because of Susan, her son Harold, Erie, and Kathy, the landmark proposal was all I had to do. And frankly, that was the easy part. So with that, I now have the honor of introducing you to Harold Woodson Jr. and owners Kathy and Erie, and I understand we're going to open it up for questions and discussions. Thank you for listening to me.
Yay!
Beautiful.
Right?
Well done.
Oh,
Well done. Yeah.
thank you.
Very, very well done. Thank you so much, Taha. That was awesome. And I can't wait to share that with everyone after the event is over. So thank you for sending the PowerPoint, making that. Whew.
My
Okay.
pleasure.
So now we get to talk to each other for like the next 30 minutes, which is going to be fabulous. Oh yes, Taha, amazing. Love that, Naomi. That's great. So I have a handful of questions. I shared them with the four of you and everyone else in the meeting. It is intended to be a group discussion. Some of the questions are clearly for our guest speakers, but there are some that I would just love to hear from all of us on. And I imagine that you all have questions as well, so I won't take up all of our time with my own questions because I definitely want to hear from you all, and I'm sure they do too. But to kick off our question, and this one comes from Eugenia. I want to start off here because it's specific, and Taha, since you just got done talking about the details of the nomination process, I think it's appropriate to start here. And I'll put it in the chat as well so that all of us can read it, in addition to you all listening to me ask the question. So given the zoning of the lot on which the Cayton-Revels house sits, a new multifamily building that is larger in scale and taller in height could be built. Facts. And most of the block reflects higher density. So given the development pressures in Seattle, and I know that we'll get into some of this, we'll come back to this later, did existing land use laws factor into your decision to seek landmark designation? And really that's a question for all of you. So whoever wants to tap in and answer that first, don't be shy.
Well, it certainly wasn't a factor for me. I mean, I knew nothing about the landmarking process, and I didn't realize that most landmarks get put into motion usually when the place is about to be torn down. So I didn't know that proactive landmarking wasn't a thing. It just felt important, and that was why we did it. But I understand that proactive preservation is rare.
After we bought the house in the early 90s, we had been getting offers to buy it for years and years and years, and we ignored every single one of them, just right in the trash, because we knew it was a house we wanted to preserve.
When we saw it and bought it, it was like, it was special. And it was special, and we knew shortly thereafter, when we found all these artifacts in the attic, so we knew that somebody important had lived there. And then as we figured out who it was like, an important Black family lived here, and they need to be remembered. And it was our job and our community's job to do that. So it was just what we needed to do.
Yeah.
Harold, what do you think?
It was heaven sent that Kathy and Erie had purchased the home. He's been the best caretaker of this house, considering the fact that the history of it, and there's history in a lot of these homes, these Queen Anne homes, but for this particular home is close to my heart and my family's heart. I just appreciate the fact that Erie and Cassie are friends, and they have included me in each of the steps as far as just maintaining it, the color of the paint. What do I think about that? The one thing, the landscaping is actually all original from the time that the house was built. It's just grown. My mother's ashes have been keeping the flowers blooming.
Yep.
The roses.
The roses.
Thank you all. I really like this question that Jeff just put in the chat, so I'm going to skip over my next question and go to this one. What does it feel like to live in a house with such significance to the city and to its original family? I think that's a good follow-up.
Well, we don't currently live in it. We bought it with two other people, and our two friends lived in it for a while. But from the first moment we went into the house, and especially when tenants were moving out and we were doing maintenance, I just felt a tangible link to, like, I expected to see Susie Revels Cayton walk out of the kitchen at any moment, or Horace come in the front door. It was this very tangible. This is the way they would have known it if they had walked in the door. It was like, I'm home, throw my hat on the couch, what's for dinner, So it always had a very tangible aura and sensibility to me.
And we I mean, we're not gone yet, and so we are definitely thinking about like a move up there in the next couple years. It would just be such a privilege, I think, and many times we've talked about it, and now as we're getting older and that, and it's just, we realize the importance, and I'd love to live there.
I mean, we like old houses anyway. We've been fixing up old houses, so I just like that aspect, and the fact that the Caytons live there, it just makes it just amazing.
Then Harold, you can come and stay.
I'd love to. I think one of the most amazing things is the fact that the lock on the front door is original to my great-grandfather. If he had the keys, he could actually come in the house.
Oh, yeah. No.
Yeah.
So we're looking forward to that, living there.
I can attest to the spirit that is there. Definitely, when I got a tour, it's from another world. It really does feel like it's stopped in time.
Wow. Well, I look forward to you all being back in the house. And really
Thank you.
Enjoy it every day. So the next question that I'm going to ask is, of course, for you all. It's one of the questions that I sent you ahead of time, but I do think it's a question that everyone in the meeting can speak to. So feel free to unmute yourself and respond to this one. we've got a handful of questions that are specifically for our guests, and then there's some where I would love to hear from all of you. So I'm putting that in the chat now, and this is specifically about the landmarking process. So can you think of some specific policies, systems, or rules that inhibit or exclude individuals or communities from landmarking? And what ideas do we have to make the process more equitable?
We talked about this before on our practice run, and to me, I think the main obstacle is, well, a couple of things. It's just, sort of neutral ignorance of the process and demystifying the process. And also, I think there's this thing put out that if you landmark a house that you own or live in, you're boxed into a rigid format. And after talking with Aaron in the city, you're not at all. There's incredible flexibility. And so I think those 2 points need to be made and overcome, demystifying the process, which Taha's been very good at doing. And also from owner standpoint, it's really flexible. It's not a big, bad city bureaucracy that's going to make you do this or that or the other thing. They work with you to, preserve the house, but also in a way that is maintained in the 21st century, and with a lot of flexibility. So I think that's a very important thing to get across, the flexibility.
And there are like tax incentives and that, or help things change. I don't know what it's called exactly, but you get some benefits as a result of having a landmark status home, right?
Yes, incentives is the right word, Kathy. That's exactly the right word.
Pardon me?
Incentives is exactly the right word. That's part
okay.
of the
Okay. Yeah, and we weren't aware of those things at all, but it's really nice. And we want this. I mean, I just think there's so many. Our city is a great city, and we have a lot more. Probably, we have a lot of history we don't know about, or little communities know about, and it's just a great gift for the future.
Yeah. Agreed.
Thank you. Anyone else have thoughts to share on this one? I have more questions, of course, but I definitely want to hold space for everyone to contribute their thoughts and ideas.
Taylor, I have a couple of thoughts.
Yes.
I think, so hi everyone, I'm Eugenia Wu with Historic Seattle. I work with a lot of, my colleague and I, Jeff Murdoch, we work with a lot of folks who contact us about landmarking, the process, what it means. I think a barrier or something that's difficult is, just sort of where to start, like to do research, where to go, or also they think that needs to be some academic writing. It doesn't need to be. So, if you're a good writer and you like history and you like to do some research, then you already kind of have a leg up. And so that really helps. And you're telling a story. And so please don't be intimidated by some of the ones. A lot of the nominations are written by paid consultants, and that's what they do for a living. And they do a great job, but it's a lot of information. The reports are very thick. It is intimidating, but you don't need to do that. And I just have to say, Taha's nomination is one of the best written ones I've seen. And compared to
So sweet.
to people who do it professionally, and it's just it's such a joy to read. And so I just want to give kudos to you, and also to Marvin and to Ryan, who are here as well, who helped her as well. So, and some other folks.
And I was going to say too, it was a 30-year process for us to, we in the early 90s, we thought about, we want to do this.
We in fact started the process.
We had papers and we had pictures, but we never, it just kind of like piled. And then Taha came along and it took 7 months. So it's a process, but it was fun.
Yeah, it's great. She took it across the finish line.
And we knew too that we believed it was an important house. And so we talked to people that also believed it, as opposed to the ones that would say, oh, you're never going to get that. That doesn't really count. And it's like, we know. So you find the people that want to move it forward.
I was surprised by how much that was discouraging. Like originally I was like, is this house landmarked, isn't it? And just like talking to people, they were like, there's a reason why it's not landmarked. And people would like act the expert opinion and say
Oh, yeah.
like, oh, that's not, you can't landmark that. It's already zoned, even though they didn't know, so just don't be discouraged by what people say. They'll say
Yeah.
all kinds of things.
Well, and early on, we began a correspondence with Richard Hobbs, and I asked him when I first started haphazardly writing out my scribbles towards nomination. He said, "What do you think, Richard?" He said, "Should be a slam dunk," and he was, he was right on the money, and that was 25 years ago. So you need to talk to the right people, get encouragement, be around positive people.
And we talked to. Sorry, we talked to Susan Woodson too. I mean, when we would go when she was here and we saw her in Chicago, just about that process.
Yeah.
And of course, she was like right on it.
Yeah.
And she was the one that contacted Richard Hobbs to do the book on the Cayton family. He was actually with his thesis when he was at Washington State University, or University of Washington, put it that way. But it was. My mother was quite instrumental, even from heaven.
Mm-hmm.
She guided. She gave us guidance.
I still feel her presence, and in fact, both Harold and I carry a bit of her literally arm with us in our lungs because we tried throwing her ashes off a ferry boat in Elliott Bay, and it just all came back to us.
And she didn't want to get wet.
She didn't want to get wet.
Thank you all. Ryan, did you want to add anything before we move to our next question?
Sure. This really was, really an amazing process to see, unfold. Taha did such a wonderful job in writing the nomination, and I think also, Taha, you're being quite modest because I think you're right. Your career in writing and your writing skills really brought that story to life, as Eugenia was mentioning. And that's why I think it was such a captivating read. To Erie and Kathy, thank you so much for your stewardship of the home and being supportive of that. I think, another barrier as we're kind of talking about these types of things is if the owner doesn't support it, that being, very challenging, as well as kind of the education around it too. And, to hear that there's some flexibility from landmarks is great. And Mr. Woodson, thank you so much for your contributions as well, sharing the stories, being able to help guide along with your mother as well this application process, because I think that also really showed itself in the nomination, as well as really made an impression on the Landmarks board. I would just add one more piece where I would also like to advocate for kind of the increased visibility and the republication of some of the sources that aided this nomination, in particular those that focus on the Black American population in the area. So for instance, Seattle's Black Victorians, and being able to look to some of those sources. So it was helpful today to see a lot of those sources be online. I know that was very helpful in this process, but also to think about some of the other resources that are available to help be able to provide that bedrock for the criteria as it relates to cultural and societal significance.
Thank you, Ryan. That's actually a great segue into the next question. I'm popping that in the chat now, and this is another one where everyone can contribute because it's sourcing knowledge and information from you all. So what did you all learn from this particular nomination process that you wish you'd known before you started? And then the part two is, what knowledge and tips can you share with others who are interested in pursuing community-led landmarking? And again, question for all, but we can start with the four of you. I know. I love a good reflection question.
I learned you don't give up. And I don't really have, I just think it was meant to be how I knew enough. We knew enough to hang on to our concept, our idea, and then Taha came along. So that's my answer.
Thanks, Kathy.
One thing I learned, and again, repeating the point of the flexibility, I had these preconceived notions that there was a very rigid set of guidelines, but it's really not the case. It's the city, the landmarks folks really want to work with you. You're talking to a human being. You're not talking to a monolith, and it's there's a lot of air in there and a lot of light and a lot of flexibility and ways to work things out.
Yeah, it's not a bureaucracy like some of the other parts of our city is. It was working with Erin was easy. She was, it was a group. I just felt like it was a group effort. It was not like us versus them.
Thank you. That's key. Taha, you look like you're.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about it for a long time. I guess what I learned was that the buck really stops at you. You know, when I found out it wasn't landmarked, I was like, oh, somebody will get it landmarked. And then after a while, it was like, oh, maybe we should just do it. You know, so it was just don't just be audacious, I guess, and just try something. So many people wanted this to happen, and that's why it happened.
Harold, do you have any thoughts? And everyone else, please.
Yeah, well, Seattle is, I live in the Bay Area in California here, and Seattle is basically the same. That there are more people than there are housing, and so it's trying to hold on to the history of a city to get the flavor of a city. That this is something that the city and people wouldn't want to lose. History is probably it's something that we need to hold on to and to pass on into the future for people to know what life was like.
Yeah. Amen.
Mm-hmm.
History is not as etched in stone as we think. So be curious.
Yeah,
I think that's good to hear the curious part, because even as we worked together as a group, there was a lot of curiosity, and it just gave more energy to the whole project, and it was fun. It was not one of those things. Oh, I dread we're getting together again, and it's going to be all these questions. It was fun. It's probably because we were all in isolation.
Awesome, thanks, y'all. Anyone else have things or thoughts to contribute to this?
I'd like to just add the tip for people who are hearing this and are inspired by it, that this is what Historic Seattle is here for too. And so I know Taha is well connected to people who were able to help, and she had the curiosity and the wherewithal to find the people she needed to find. If it's a challenge, that's what we're here for, and you don't have to go it alone, so we can be a resource for guidance of the process and the elements of landmarking that might need more support.
This is not really in the area of what did I learn from the process, but one of the privileges, joys, and pleasures was meeting Susan Woodson and then Harold. We met Susan pretty shortly after we bought the house. She came out here because she used to like to vacation in Seattle, and she came up with, I think, her niece Madge, and we had wine in the house, and we talked, and almost immediately she said, we're family now. And when we met Harold, it was the same thing. I think we feel very close to each other and close to the connections of this family and the fabric of American history that goes through it, both good and bad and neutral.
And the contributions they have made. And it's in Seattle. It needs to be, we knew it needed to be honored, and it needed to be landmarked, whatever it took, it's like.
And I'll further add, I learned that Seattle, compared to other cities, is not very good about preserving its history. And we all need to do better.
Thanks, you all. So we have about 10 minutes left of discussion, and I have a couple of more questions, but I do want to make sure that I am leaving space and time for you all to ask questions as well. So if there's a burning question that any of you have, either for the group or for our guest speakers, now would be a great time to unmute and ask away. And I do have one from the chat, if nobody's ready to go right now, from our chat on YouTube. I'll pop that in here as well. And it's kind of a leading question, and I actually love that it was asked because it's what I do all day. So what are some good ways of telling the stories and attracting people to see and learn about historic houses like this that are privately owned and occupied? So a question for our panelists, but also I think a great question for the group, since many of us here work in preservation and are actively telling these stories. I almost want to pick on someone, but I'll wait. I won't do it. The person
This one that gives tours up there in Capitol Hill, you know, for historical houses. I know they have them in a lot of major cities. There's out in Chicago, this and that. So there's always interesting history, you know, in each city from the very beginning. And I'm sure there's quite a few other houses. It's like the Jackson Street is a historical area and stuff for jazz music. And I'm sure there's quite a few other homes there where someone, you know, is walking around. Well, you know, we have walking tours here. You know.
I was going to pick on my colleagues at Historic Seattle for this particular question, and specifically ask if there are books, because I know that with private homes, the touring thing can get a little bit hard, but I was thinking about like reading resources for folks who are interested in learning more. And if it doesn't immediately come to mind, don't worry. I'll just source it from you later and then email everyone. But that was the thought that came to mind. Eugenia?
I have one. So the Seattle Architecture Foundation, another wonderful organization, they have a book. It is a walking guide to downtown Seattle. And just last year, they introduced an app version of that, and it's free, so you can download it and do it at your leisure. You can just do it as an armchair walking tour, or actually go out downtown on your own. And so that's a way. History Link has tours. So those of you who have been following us, maybe you've attended some of our virtual programs with History Link. They've been doing tours of neighborhoods. So again, you could do it online or actually do the tour in person. And so there are different ways. And there are definitely books about the history of Seattle and all that too as well. But the other ones are a little bit more manageable. Yeah, I don't know. Jeff, do you have any suggestions?
I was just going to say that one great product of landmarking a house is that this history that's all been documented through all of your hard work. Anybody can now read the nomination report. This history is available to anyone. And so anybody who may be doing further research can use Taha's work and everyone else's contributions, and hopefully, you know, the result will be more nominations, and this history will go much further than just for this one house. So even though it is a private home that people live in, the history is now public, and so everyone can learn about it, which is great.
I have a question. Are there times when an organization does like a class on how to?
We do. We have done landmarking seminars, a series of them in the past, and we do them on a relatively regular basis. I think Eugenia and Jeff have led those.
Well, good. Yeah, because we have that's very good.
Yeah, we've done workshops at the Good Shepherd Center in Wallingford, which is a building that we own. And it's like a half day kind of thing. And we talked about sort of the different, you know, what the nomination is, what the process is, and also the pieces of it. And kind of the way Taha outlined it and where you can go to find these resources. And we've had past Landmarks board members speak. And we've had the Landmark staff as well. So Sarah Sote is the City Historic Preservation Officer. So then the people attending the class can actually sort of see, the people at
Oh,
the
good.
city who are
Yeah.
behind this. So yeah. So we'll probably do it again some point in the future in person, but it's definitely something that could translate into this format as well. So.
Oh yeah, no, I think that's really, I mean, helpful. And it also then gives people a group of other people that are doing something similar, just, more of other people to rely on as far as for assistance. Yeah. Because we just had Taha. And our water leak, it's like.
A support group is like a big. Go ahead. Sorry.
Taha has done a phenomenal job. I mean, just in our testing, I found out that Obama actually lived across the street from that house. That house is no longer there, but he had lived there as an infant.
Yeah.
A support group is so important, I think, for something like this. You cannot do it alone. And I was lucky in the sense that I had a regular Zoom call with my friends every week, and we were all history nuts. But find a group of people that you know, and just start talking about whatever you're working on.
Thank you.
I just want to call out what Taha said earlier too about being curious. I think books and the walking tour guides that we shared, they're helpful resources, but Taha shared the resources where she found information on this house, and if you had been on a Capitol Hill walking tour, it likely wouldn't have been on there. A lot of times what those cover are landmarks and the best as deemed by some historian, and we know that can sometimes exclude houses that have a history related to people of color. And so if you see a place and you think it's special, really look to see if it's safe. And if not, this is where Taha kicked it off and made sure that it would be.
That's good. That's good advice.
Thanks, y'all. And for everyone watching on YouTube, there are resources that are being shared in this chat on Zoom, but I'll make sure that I include those in the follow-up email. So you'll capture all of that good stuff. We did get another question from Ryan. Ryan, would you like to unmute and ask it yourself, or do you want me to read it?
I can give it a shot. Thanks, Taylor. One thing that I just would love to hear from our panelist is, it seems like this in some ways was potentially a guided journey. The constellation of factors, the circumstances, the way that you all became close and worked as a team. And I'm just wondering if you could maybe speak a bit more to that, or maybe I'm off the mark, but just occurred to me and love to hear more about that. Thanks.
Well, I'll kick that off. We first saw the house in the early 90s. We love old houses. We knew this house was special. We didn't yet know the history. We put in an offer. Someone else got the one over us, but then that offer was dropped, and then we were able to jump on it. So right off the bat, there was a little bit of providence there. And then shortly thereafter, we found these amazing artifacts under the attic floor, documents signed by Cayton-Revels, tintype of a young Black man, which no one has been able to identify. So we knew that was special. And then we met Madge really shortly thereafter, and through her met Susan Woodson, and then Harold Woodson.
And Richard Hobbs.
And Richard Hobbs. And I think there's just been a series of, call them coincidences. I'm not particularly, mystical, but I think there was some kind of a guiding force. And the fact that we were able to buy it as sort of natural preservationists who could, keep it under custody until someone came along who knew what they were doing. And
under custody.
And also, recently also Harold gave me a photo of his mom in high school. Beautiful photograph that we have upstairs. And I just feel like Susan has been sort of like overseeing this whole operation. So that's my take.
Yeah, we are like the third. Yeah, we're like the third owners, and that it just
And oh, just incidentally, the portrait that Harold gave me was taken in the Seattle studio. So I just love that. Yeah, before she moved to Chicago with see who drove her out, Harold?
Paul Robeson.
Paul Robeson drove her out to Chicago. Yeah.
Paul Robeson.
So they had all these, and Booker T. Washington took a bath in our tub upstairs. You know, so there's just all these
We
amazing,
still have the tub. We don't
all
change
these amazing
things.
connections. Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah, the son, Horace Cayton, he was friends with Langston Hughes. Actually,
Yes.
he was friends with Paul Robeson because he had actually was sick. He was supposed to escort his sister to Chicago. Basically, the reasoning behind it is the grandfather, Horace Sr., was ailing and had just was about to pass, and the mother was still there, Susie, and she suggested that they move to Chicago to take care of Horace and find a husband. So he not being able to do it, he enlisted his friend Paul Robeson, and Paul had a driver drive them across country. And so they ended
Love
up they were living in my uncle was living in the Rosenwald Garden Apartments, which is
oh yeah.
a beautiful story. Rosenwald was friends with Booker T. Washington. He opened up over 5,000 schools in the South. He was became the owner of Sears and Roebuck's, and started the catalog company. And so my parents moved in, my mother moved in there, my father met my mother, they moved in, and it was just magical, the whole
That's
thing.
where you went to school.
Yeah,
You went to school there. Yeah.
Yeah, I went to Howelton Day School, which was a private school at the time. My classmates included Ralph Metcalf Jr., who was the #2 man in the 1936 Olympics.
Yeah.
Haywood Owens, his uncle was Jesse Owens. The Singstack family, which was the owners of the Chicago Daily Defender. So there was a lot of history there. We were all together. So what's going on now is we're bringing history back together again with this house and all of the things that are happening today. And this is what we have to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
This was definitely guided. Back to Ryan's question. 100% this was guided. I think it was Susan's spirit.
And we just
very
feel
clear.
so fortunate. Yes. Yes. It's made our lives better.
I know it's made my life complete.
Oh, Harold, stop.
I wake up in the morning and I say, I'm a winner. And every day is Christmas.
So we are a couple of minutes over, but we did get a really awesome question from our YouTube chat. So I wonder if the four of you can stay on and maybe answer this one. I think it'll be quick. I didn't even wait for the yes. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just about to go into reading it. So Erie, you mentioned earlier that you found things in the attic to show significance when you were in the process of writing the nomination. And so the question is, would you both share about some of the exciting things that you found while you were up there?
Well, we found two documents. One was a dry goods receipt
From Alabama?
from Mississippi that Hiram Revels had bought, just a collection of everyday things. And the receipt was signed by him. He was also a minister, and there was a marriage certificate that he presided over. It wasn't a family member, but it was a marriage certificate that he signed. These are from like 1885, that period. And as I said, there was a tintype of a young black man. I showed it to Susan. She had no idea who it was. It might have been, Revel Jr.'s buddy. Probably it was a friend of one of their kids. And there was also a tintype of somebody's pet dog up there. So between the photographs and these things signed by Hiram Revels, like, well, who's Hiram Revels? Oh, that's who Hiram. And then pretty soon it just started snowballing after that. And
we had a box we kept everything in. We had a box.
Yeah,
big box.
So those are the main things. And And then just the condition of the house, it had gasoliers in it. And to those unfamiliar with gasoliers, at the turn of the 20th century, people weren't sure if this electricity thing was going to work. So there was lighting fixtures. One half was gas and one half was electric, and they were still connected. You could go and light the gas fixtures. So it was things like that, and the fact that it was untouched, and just that it had a tangible something about it.
There's one room, I think it might have been the nursery in that has ducts across the top of it, like between the picture rail and the ceiling. And it's these, I mean, it was a baby's room.
It was obviously the baby's room.
It's the duck room now,
Yeah.
It's like everybody had to leave those ducks alone. It's very sweet.
I remember when I was there, you told me that the house was complete except for one brick in the hearth, fireplace hearth, and you found that in the backyard.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Well.
Yeah. And we're going to dig out the basement soon. Maybe, I mean, we're starting to do the basement. So Lord knows what we'll find.
Yeah.
We'll keep you posted.
I was going to say, this sounds like a blog waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. We are at our time. This was amazing. We're getting a lot of love on both of these chats. So I'll send all of the comments to you all because you deserve to read all of the wonderful things that folks are saying about you. Taha, that presentation was amazing. Cannot thank you enough for putting that together for us. And I will share all of the resources, including Taha's presentation, in that follow-up email. I think those are all my final words. If you all have final thoughts, go for it, and then I'll end our meeting.
I just have one quick one. People have been asking this, and some of you may be wondering, what are our plans for the future of the house? Well, we want the house, if possible, to go on another couple of centuries because it's a well-built house. So we may live in it ourselves at some point, but we are planning now to leave it to some nonprofit agency that benefits immigrants or asylum seekers or refugees as a place for headquartered temporary housing. I think that would be in the spirit of the house and the legacy of civil rights. So we're looking in that direction. We're not going to sell it. We want to leave it.
It will be. Sorry. No. It will be donated to some very good trouble and work.
Yeah.
I like that. For some good trouble.
Yes.
Yeah. There's also an organization, I think it's called Africa Town, and it's an organization that's working toward de-gentrifying and keeping Black families in Seattle. So that's another organization we may donate to. So we're looking.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Question for Taylor. What is this going to be under YouTube? If I have to, in order to find it, we do have another cousin that actually lives there in Seattle, and she wanted to see what was going on and couldn't get on, so she's using a phone. But I'll be able to at least pass on the YouTube thing to her.
Absolutely. I will email the four of you the recording, the YouTube link, so that you can start sharing it out immediately.
Thank you.
Yes. Everyone else will get the fancy email from me with all the links and resources and things.
I just have one more thing. Hi, Bob and Leonard.
Love it. Okay, well, see you next time. Thank you again.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Have a good evening.
Good to see you guys.